The sun was dipping behind the buildings of Maplewood, a quiet suburban town where the streets still echoed with the sounds of kids laughing, dogs barking, and the occasional skateboard clattering against the pavement. Officer Mark Daniels, a 42-year-old police sergeant with a reputation for being by the book, was finishing his evening patrol. To most, he was the model of order, neat uniform, clean record, sharp tone. But lately, his patience had been running thin. He often said things like, "Kids these days don't respect authority," or, "Back in my day, we knew our place." And on that Friday evening, he was about to prove it. He turned onto 8th Street, where a group of teenagers were skating in the plaza, flipping boards and laughing loudly. It was harmless fun, but to Mark, it looked like chaos. He parked his cruiser beside the curb and stepped out, his boots heavy against the concrete. "Hey," he barked. The teens froze mid-laugh. "You can't skate here," he said firmly. "This is public property." One of the boys, tall, lean, maybe 16, stepped forward. His hoodie was torn at the sleeves, his skateboard plastered with stickers. "Sorry, officer," he said, not looking afraid. "We're not bothering anyone. We just needed a place with smooth ground." Mark frowned. "Your place is the skate park, not city property. You want to play games? Do it somewhere else." The kid's name was Jalen Carter. He'd grown up in Maplewood his whole life, the kind of kid who worked part-time at a diner and took care of his little brother while his mom worked double shifts. But to Mark, he was just another punk kid with attitude. Jalen lifted his board. "All right, we'll leave." But before turning away, he muttered, "Guess we're not welcome anywhere, huh?" Mark heard it. "Excuse me?" Jalen looked up, calm but tired. "We weren't doing anything wrong, but you didn't even ask." Mark's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone, kid." Jalen gave a faint smirk. "You watch yours, officer." That was enough to light Mark's temper. "You think you're clever? You kids never learn. Always blaming the world for your own bad choices. I've seen 100 like you. No respect. No future." The plaza went silent. Even the other teens looked away. Jalen's eyes darkened. "You don't know anything about me," Mark scoffed. "I know enough." Jalen picked up his board and turned to leave. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "That's the problem." That night at dinner, Mark vented to his wife, Laura. "Another one of those kids at the plaza again," he grumbled. "No manners, mouthy as ever." Laura stirred her tea. "Mark, they're just kids." "They're disrespectful," he shot back. "Someone's got to remind them who's in charge." Their 14-year-old daughter, Emily, looked up from her phone. "Dad, you sound like Grandpa." Mark gave her a look. "And that's supposed to be an insult?" Emily shrugged, smiling faintly. "Kinda." The next day, Jalen was back at the plaza, headphones on, practicing alone. He couldn't stop replaying that officer's words in his head. No respect, no future. He didn't care what the man thought of him, but something about the way Mark had looked at him, like he'd already decided who he was, stuck. He kicked his board, trying a trick he hadn't landed before. He fell, hard, scraping his elbow, but he laughed it off. A nearby car honked as it drove by, the same police cruiser from the night before. Mark's eyes met his for a brief second. Neither smiled, neither waved. Just a silent wall between two worlds that didn't understand each other. But that wall was about to break, in a way neither of them could have imagined. Because within 24 hours, Officer Daniels' daughter would be in danger, and the same kid he'd mocked would be the one holding her life in his hands. The following afternoon unfolded like any other in Maplewood, until it didn't. Officer Mark Daniels was on desk duty at the precinct, reviewing reports, when his phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Laura. "Mark, Emily's not answering her phone. She was supposed to be home an hour ago." He frowned, glancing at the clock. 4:37 p.m. Emily's school let out at 3:15. She always came straight home. At first, he told himself she was probably at a friend's house, but a second message came through before he could reply. Her school said she left right after class. She never made it home. Mark's stomach dropped. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "Chief," he said, voice low but urgent, "my daughter's missing." Within minutes, patrol cars were circling the neighbourhood. Officers checked bus stops, stores, parks. Mark drove in frantic circles around Maplewood, calling her name out his window like a man possessed. He stopped near the plaza, the same one where he'd argued with Jalen Carter the day before, and there, leaning against a wall, skateboard at his feet, was Jalen himself. Mark jumped out of his car. "You!" Jalen blinked. "Officer Daniels?" Mark strode toward him, eyes wild. "You see a girl, blonde hair, blue jacket, about 14? Jalen shook his head slowly. "No, sir. What's going on?" "My daughter didn't come home from school," Mark said. "You hang around here. You see anything unusual? Any cars parked too long? Anybody talking to kids?" Jalen thought for a second, trying to ignore how the man's voice trembled. This wasn't the same arrogant cop from before. This was a father. "There was a white van earlier," Jalen said carefully. "Parked near the corner store around 3. Guy inside was watching the kids leave school." Mark froze. "What did you just say?" "I didn't think much of it at first," Jalen continued, "but the guy was still there when I passed again later. No license plate on the back." Mark's pulse spiked. "Can you show me exactly where?" Jalen nodded and grabbed his board. "Follow me." They drove down Elmwood Avenue, the tension thick inside the cruiser. Mark's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Jalen leaned forward, eyes scanning the sidewalks. "There," he said finally, pointing. "That's where the van was parked." Mark pulled over. The spot was empty now, just tire marks and a few oil stains. But something caught his eye near the gutter, a small blue hair clip glinting in the sunlight. He froze. He knew that clip. It was Emily's. Jalen noticed the look on his face. "That's hers, isn't it?" Mark nodded slowly, picking it up with trembling fingers. "She never takes this off." For a moment, the world seemed to close in. Then Jalen said quietly, "There's one more thing. I think I know where he might have gone." Mark looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Jalen swallowed hard. "I saw that same van a few nights ago, near the old railway yard. It's abandoned now. People say sketchy stuff happens there sometimes." Mark stared at him. "You're sure?" "Positive." Mark grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. I need backup at the old railway yard off Route 9, possible abduction suspect." Then he turned to Jalen. "You stay here." But Jalen shook his head. "You don't know that area like I do. There are back roads, hidden alleys. You'll waste time without me." Mark hesitated, torn between instinct and desperation. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but you stay behind me." They reached the railway yard just as dusk began to fall. The air smelled of rust and old wood, the buildings half collapsed and silent. Mark's flashlight swept across the dirt, illuminating tracks, tire ruts, and scattered debris. Jalen motioned toward a storage shed near the far end. That door wasn't open before. Mark's heart pounded. He drew his gun and approached slowly. "Stay back!" He pushed the door open, the rusty hinges screeching. Inside, dim light flickered from a broken bulb. And then, a muffled sound. A whimper. "Emily!" Mark whispered. "Dad!" came a faint cry. He rushed forward. There she was, tied to a chair but unharmed, eyes wide with relief. Behind him, Jalen shouted, "Officer, look out!" A shadow moved in the corner, the kidnapper lunging from behind a crate with a wrench raised high. But before Mark could react, Jalen grabbed a broken skateboard deck from the floor and swung it hard. The man collapsed to the ground with a groan. Mark turned, stunned. Jalen stood panting, the broken board still in his hand. "Guess skating's good for reflexes." Mark's voice shook. "You just saved my daughter's life." Jalen looked at him, calm but serious. "You'd have done the same for me." Mark swallowed hard, looking at the boy he'd called No Future. Now, standing before him, was the bravest person he'd ever met. The blue and red lights from the patrol cars painted the broken walls of the old railway yard, flickering like ghosts. Officers moved in every direction, shouting, securing the scene, handcuffing the kidnapper, and guiding Emily Daniels to safety. Her father, Officer Mark Daniels, stood frozen for a moment, adrenaline still burning in his veins. Then he dropped to his knees beside her, his voice breaking. Sweetheart, are you okay?" Emily nodded weakly, tears in her eyes. "I'm fine, Dad. He didn't hurt me." Mark wrapped his arms around her, trembling. For a long moment, the world disappeared. It was just him and his daughter, alive, breathing, safe. And then he looked up and saw Jalen Carter standing a few feet away, silent, hands still shaking from the fight. Their eyes met. Mark stood slowly, walked over, and for the first time in his 20 years of service, he felt utterly speechless. "Son," he said finally, his voice rough, "I don't know how to thank you." Jalen shrugged, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. "You don't have to. I just did what anyone would do." Mark shook his head. "No, you did what I should have done yesterday, looked past judgment and acted with courage." Jalen blinked, surprised by the honesty in the man's tone. "Yesterday," Mark continued, "I treated you like you were nothing, and tonight you saved everything that matters to me." The weight of those words hung between them, heavy, raw, real. Mark reached out his hand. "I was wrong about you, Jalen. About a lot of things." For a moment, the boy hesitated. Then he shook his hand, firm, steady. "Guess we both learned something," Jalen said quietly. 2 days later, Maplewood was buzzing with news. Local TV stations ran headlines. "Teen skater saves officer's daughter from kidnapping." "From rebel to hero, 16-year-old stops criminal at abandoned yard." The town that once eyed Jalen as a troublemaker now couldn't stop praising him. People he didn't even know stopped him on the street to shake his hand. The mayor called his act a symbol of courage and unity, but Jalen didn't care about the attention. He just wanted to get back to skating, back to normal. Still, things weren't quite the same. One afternoon, while Jalen was practicing at the plaza, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Nice trick," the voice said. "You always land that clean." Jalen turned. Standing there, hands in his pockets, was Officer Daniels. No cruiser, no radio, just a man in jeans and a t-shirt. Jalen smirked. "You stalking me now, officer?" Mark chuckled softly. "Let's call it supervision. My daughter made me promise to thank you again." "She's okay?" "Better than okay," he said. "Won't stop talking about you. You're her hero now." Jalen looked down, embarrassed. "She doesn't owe me anything." Mark shook his head. "Neither of you owe me anything, but I owe you an apology." He took a deep breath. "When I saw you that day, I didn't see a kid. I saw what I wanted to see, some troublemaker, some stereotype I made up in my head. That's not who you are, and it's not who I want to be anymore." Jalen looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness," Mark added quietly, "but I do want to earn your respect, the same way you earned mine." Jalen thought for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe we start with calling me Jalen, not Kid." Mark smiled. "Deal." A few weeks later, the town held a small ceremony to honor Jalen's bravery. The community center was packed, police officers, families, teachers, and even the mayor. When they called Jalen up to the stage, he looked out at the crowd and saw Mark Daniels standing proudly beside Emily and Laura. The mayor handed Jalen a plaque for extraordinary courage and selflessness in the face of danger. The applause was loud, but Jalen's eyes stayed fixed on the man who'd once told him he had no future. Mark clapped the loudest. When the crowd quieted, Jalen spoke into the microphone. "I'm not a hero. I just saw someone who needed help. And I hope people remember that anyone can make a difference, no matter who they are." The room went silent for a beat, then erupted in cheers. After the ceremony, Mark found him outside, leaning against his skateboard. "You were great up there," Mark said. Jalen grinned. "Not bad for a punk kid, huh?" Mark laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're never going to let me live that down, are you?" "Not a chance," Jalen said with a smirk. Mark's face softened. "You ever think about joining the youth cadet program? You've got instincts most adults don't." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "A skater cop? That'd be new." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," Mark said. "Someone who sees things from the street up." Jalen looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe. I'll think about it." As the sun began to set, Emily ran out from the center and hugged Jalen tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "Any time, kid." Mark watched them, emotion filling his chest. He looked at Jalen, not as a stranger, not as a suspect, but as someone who had changed his life. "See you around, officer," Jalen said, grabbing his board. "Call me Mark," he replied. And as Jalen skated off down the street, wind in his hair, laughter echoing through the fading light, Mark felt something shift inside him, something deep and necessary. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just enforcing the law, he was learning what it meant to understand it. A month had passed since that night in the abandoned railway yard, but for Officer Mark Daniels and Jalen Carter, life hadn't returned to normal, it had changed. Something unspoken had grown between them, respect, maybe even friendship. But more than that, there was understanding. Mark had gone from being the cop who scolded kids at the plaza to the man who showed up there every Saturday morning. No badge, no uniform, just a father and a learner. He'd sit on the benches, watching the skaters fly across the concrete, and for the first time, he didn't see chaos. He saw community, and at the center of it was Jalen. It was Jalen's idea to start something new, something that might keep other kids from being written off like he once was. He called it Bridge Project. "The idea's simple," Jalen explained to Mark one afternoon as they walked through the plaza. "Cops and kids work together, clean up the neighborhood, rebuild old parks, teach each other stuff. Not like some forced PR thing. Real teamwork." Mark listened, nodding. "You want to rebuild trust." Jalen grinned. "Nah, I want to build it. Can't rebuild something that never existed." Mark chuckled softly. "You're smarter than most officers I know." Jalen smirked. "Maybe you should put that in writing." Within weeks, the Bridge Project began. Mark used his connections in the precinct to get a small grant. Jalen recruited kids from school and the skate community. The first event took place right in the plaza, painting benches, fixing lights, and cleaning graffiti. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. When the police officers showed up that morning, most of the teens were nervous. The tension in the air was thick. Mark broke the silence. "All right, everyone," he said, hands in his pockets. "Let's make this place something we can all be proud of." Jalen handed him a paintbrush. "Think you can handle this, officer?" Mark smirked. "I've faced worse." Soon, laughter replaced the awkwardness. Kids taught officers how to skateboard. Officers showed them basic safety tricks. Parents came to watch, unsure at first, then smiling as they saw something they never thought possible: understanding. Even the chief showed up, clapping Mark on the shoulder. "Didn't think I'd see the day you'd trade your badge for a paint roller." Mark grinned. Turns out, it's the same job, just a cleaner kind of justice. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, Jalen and Mark sat on the edge of the plaza, watching kids skate in the golden light. Emily, Mark's daughter, rolled up beside them on a small pink board. "Jalen, watch this!" she shouted, kicking off and landing a simple trick. He clapped. "Nice! You're getting better!" Mark smiled, pride and gratitude in his eyes. "You've been teaching her, haven't you?" Jalen shrugged. She asked. "Can't say no to that face." Mark nodded. "You know, I used to look at you and see trouble. Now I see someone my daughter looks up to." Jalen smiled faintly. Guess people change. Mark looked at him. Yeah, sometimes for the better. A few weeks later, the local news covered the bridge project. The headline read, "From conflict to connection, officer and teen build hope in Maplewood." The photo showed Mark and Jalen standing side by side, paint splattered and smiling. The comments section filled with messages like, "We need this everywhere," and "This is what real policing looks like." For once, the story wasn't about division. It was about what happens when two people stop seeing enemies and start seeing each other. That night, after everyone went home, Mark stood alone in the plaza. The air was quiet, still carrying faint laughter from earlier. Jalen rolled up beside him, skateboard under one arm. "You staying late, officer?" Mark chuckled. "You too." "Yeah," Jalen said. "Just thinking." "About what?" Jalen looked out across the freshly painted benches, the light posts shining again, the space where kids and cops had laughed together that day. "About how fast things can change," he said softly. "One day, someone tells you you've got no future. The next, you're helping build one." Mark nodded, his voice low. "And one day, someone thinks he knows everything, until a kid with a skateboard teaches him what courage looks like." They shared a quiet smile. Then Jalen dropped his board to the ground and pushed off, gliding across the smooth concrete as the wind caught his hoodie. Mark watched him go, the faint sound of wheels fading into the night. For the first time in his life, Officer Mark Daniels realized that the real job of a police officer wasn't just enforcing rules. It was learning to listen, to protect not just with authority, but with understanding. And thanks to one fearless kid, he finally knew how.